Story number 21. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson and their children were going to begin their vacation one day, and they had to be at the airport at 11:40 a.m. "It'll take us half an hour to get there in the taxi," Mr. Wilson said, "so we all have to be ready by 11 o'clock. Nobody should be late." At 10 minutes to 11, they were still all running around doing things, except Mrs. Wilson, who was sitting quietly on a chair in the garden enjoying the sun. Her husband and children were very surprised that she wasn't in a hurry too, until the taxi arrived and Mrs. Wilson said to them, "Well, I knew that this was going to happen. So before I went to bed last night, I moved all our clocks and watches ahead 20 minutes. So now we can go to the airport quietly without worrying about being late."
Now answer these questions. 1. Why did Mr. and Mrs. Wilson and their children have to be ready by 11 o'clock? 2. What were Mr. Wilson and the children doing at 10:50? 3. What was Mrs. Wilson doing? 4. How did her husband and children feel about this? 5. What had Mrs. Wilson done the night before? 6. Why had she done this? Story number 22. Miss Rogers taught physics in a New York school. Last month, she was explaining to one of her classes about sound, and she decided to test them to see how successful she had been in her explanation. She said to them, "Now, I have a brother in Los Angeles. If I was calling him on the phone, and at the same time you were 75 feet away, listening to me from across the street, which of you would hear what I said earlier, my brother or you, and for what reason?" The smartest student at once answered, "Your brother, Miss Rogers, because electricity travels faster than sound waves." "That's very good," Miss Rogers answered. But then one of the girls raised her hand, and Miss Rogers said, "Yes, Debbie?" "I disagree," Debbie said. "Your brother would hear you earlier, because when it's 11 o'clock here, it's only 8 o'clock in Los Angeles."
Now answer these questions. 1. What was the class in this story studying? 2. What question did Miss Rogers ask her class? 3. What did the smartest student answer? 4. What did Miss Rogers answer? 5. What happened then? 6. What did Debbie say? Number 23. Mr. Martin went into his usual coffee shop one morning and sat on one of the seats at the counter. Many other people came in also, but most of them did not stay long. After 15 minutes, a young man and a young woman came in. There were only 2 empty seats at the counter, one on Mr. Martin's left and the other on his right. The woman sat on one and the young man on the other. But Mr. Martin immediately offered to change places with the man so that he and the young woman could be together. "Oh, that isn't necessary," the young man said. But Mr. Martin insisted. When the young man and the woman were side by side, the young man said to her, "Well, this kind gentleman wanted us to sit together, so may I introduce myself? My name's Tom. What's yours?"
Now answer these questions. 1. Where did Mr. Martin sit in the coffee shop? 2. Who came into the coffee shop after 15 minutes? 3. What did Mr. Martin do when he saw them? 4. Why did he do this? 5. Why did the young man say it wasn't necessary for him to sit beside the woman? 6. What did he say to the young woman? Story number 24. Peter was a ventriloquist. He worked in theaters and nightclubs, but he wasn't very good, and one month he was out of work and hungry. Then he found a dog on the street and took it into a restaurant with him. They sat down at a table, and the dog seemed to order food and talk about it. So the owner of the restaurant, the waiters, and the other guests were very surprised. The owner thought that a lot of people would come to his restaurant to listen to the dog speak if it was his, so he offered to buy it. And finally, the ventriloquist agreed to sell the dog for a high price. When the owner of the restaurant had paid, the dog appeared to say to the ventriloquist, "Well, you sold me, didn't you?" "Yes, I did," answered the ventriloquist. "Then I refuse to speak ever again."
Now answer these questions. 1. What did the dog seem to do in the restaurant? 2. Why did the owner of the restaurant want to buy the dog? 3. What did the ventriloquist finally do? 4. What did the dog ask then? 5. What did the ventriloquist answer? 6. And what did the dog say then? Story number 25. Eddie liked music very much when he was at school, but when he went to the university, he decided to study medicine instead of music. When he passed his examinations and became a doctor, he had to work in a hospital for some time. There he discovered that a lot of the patients were happier and caused less trouble if pleasant music was played to them. When Eddie got an office and began to work for himself, he decided to keep his patients happy by having a tape recorder in his waiting room play beautiful music for them. But soon after the tape recorder had been put in, Eddie's nurse heard a woman who was sitting in the crowded waiting room one morning complain, "Here we're all waiting to see the doctor, and he's just playing the violin in his office instead of doing his work."
Now answer these questions. 1. What did Eddie like when he was at school? 2. What did he study at the university? 3. Where did Eddie work after he passed his examinations? 4. What did pleasant music do to a lot of the patients in the hospital? 5. Why did Eddie put a tape recorder in his waiting room? 6. What did Eddie's nurse hear a patient say one morning? Story number 26. Mr. Marsh was a senator in the government. One day, he was driving to a town to make an important speech when he stopped at a small restaurant to have some coffee. When he saw that the restaurant had some nice fresh rolls, he asked the waitress for one, and she brought it. Then he asked for some butter and jam, and she brought a very small serving of butter and a very small jar of jam. "I'd like some more jam, please," Mr. Marsh said. "I'm sorry," she answered, "but we only give one serving of butter and one jar of jam with each roll." Mr. Marsh began to get annoyed. "Do you know who I am, young lady?" he said. "I'm the state senator." "And do you know who I am?" the waitress asked. Mr. Marsh was surprised and said, "No." "Well," she answered, "I'm the person who gives out the jars of jam."
Now answer these questions. 1. Who was Mr. Marsh? 2. Why did he stop at a small restaurant? 3. What did Mr. Marsh ask the waitress to bring more of? 4. What did the waitress answer? 5. What did Mr. Marsh say about himself? 6. What did the waitress say about herself? Story number 27. Mr. Lewis was a dance teacher. He was a nice man and always had a lot of students who used to come to his classes every week. One year he moved to a new town and was soon teaching a lot of students in the dance school there. But then he decided to move again to a big city where he would have more work. When one of the ladies who regularly came to his classes heard that he was going to leave, she said to him, "The teacher who takes your place won't be as good as you are." Mr. Lewis was happy when he heard this, but he said, "Oh no, I'm sure he'll be as good as I am, or even better." The lady said, "No, 5 teachers have come and gone while I've been here, and each new one was worse than the last."
Now answer these questions. 1. What did Mr. Lewis teach? 2. Why did he want to move to a big city? 3. What did one of his students say when she heard this? 4. How did Mr. Lewis feel about this? 5. What did he say to the student? 6. What did she answer? Story number 28. 6 people were traveling in a compartment on a train. 5 of them were quiet and well-behaved, but the 6th was a rude young man who was causing a lot of trouble to the other passengers. At last, this young man got out at a station with his 2 heavy bags. None of the other passengers helped him, but one of them waited until the rude young man was very far away, and then opened the window and shouted to him. You left something behind in the compartment." Then he closed the window again. The young man turned around and hurried back with his 2 bags. He was very tired when he arrived, but he shouted through the window, "What did I leave behind?" As the train began to move again, the passenger who had called him back opened the window and said, "A very bad impression."
Now answer these questions. 1. How was the 6th passenger in the compartment different from the other 5? 2. What did he take with him when he got out? 3. What did a passenger shout to him when he was very far away? 4. What did the rude young man do then? 5. What did he ask when he got back to the compartment window? 6. What did the passenger in the compartment answer? Story number 29. Joe had a vacation, so he decided to go to the seashore for a few days. He got on a train one morning, and an hour later he was in a small town by the sea. A few minutes after he left the station, he saw a small hotel and went in. He asked the owner how much it would cost for one night there. $15, the owner answered. That's more than I can really afford to pay, Joe said sadly. All right, the owner answered. If you make your bed yourself, you can have the room for $10. Joe was very happy because he always made his own bed at home. Okay, he said, I'll do that. The owner went into a room at the back, opened a closet, took some things out, and came back to Joe. Here you are, he said, and gave him a hammer and some nails.
Now answer these questions. 1. How much did the owner of the small hotel want Joe to pay for one night there? 2. What did Joe say about this? 3. What did the owner of the small hotel say then? 4. Why was Joe happy about this? 5. What did the owner take out of a closet? 6. What did he want Joe to do? Story number 30. A teacher was asking a student a lot of questions, but the student couldn't answer any of them. The teacher then decided to ask him some very easy questions so that he could get a few right. "What was Bunker Hill?" she said. The student thought for some time and then answered, "An airport?" "No, it was a battle," the teacher said. She was getting a little angry now, but she was trying not to show it. Then she asked, "Who was the first president of the United States?" The student thought for a long time, but didn't say anything. Then the teacher got very angry and shouted, "George Washington!" The student got up and began to walk towards his seat. "Come back," the teacher said. "I didn't tell you to go." "Oh, I'm sorry," the student said. "I thought you called the next student."
Now answer these questions. 1. What was the teacher's first question? 2. What was her second question? 3. What did she say when the student couldn't answer the second question? 4. What did the student do? 5. What did the teacher say then? 6. Why did the student walk back towards his seat?